Hello, my name is Maria Helena Carey, and I am with a blog called The Hill is Home. And today I am talking to Erin Palmer. And Erin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Erin Palmer, and I'm running for DC Council Chairwoman.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. I have several questions for you, and I'm going to go ahead and ask them and, take as long as you'd like so that people can get to know you better. I know that you have had many events throughout the area and have gone knocking on doors and meeting and greeting, but for many folks, there's nothing like the comfort of their own living room. So without further ado, you are commissioner for ANC 4BO2, which is Tacoma area. But you have never held political office. So why have you chosen to run for chairwoman of the Council of the District of Columbia? And why did you choose to run for chairwoman over, say, running for council member at large?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question, and it is one that I get with some regularity. So the council chair position is an at-large position. So like the other 4 at-large council members, the council chair represents the entire city. And some people are surprised to hear that the council chair is an elected position, just like the other at-large positions. Mm-hmm. The thing that is unique about the council chair is that there's the additional role of council governance and setting some of the practices and policies of the council. And part of the skill set that I think I bring to the table is that I have an ethics and institutional accountability background. And I think that ties very directly into council governance and making sure that we have a modern, ethical, and accountable DC council. So part of my background is that I worked for the federal judiciary on judicial misconduct issues, including working for the workplace conduct working group of judges that considered workplace accountability reforms. So this was largely related to sexual harassment and sexual misconduct issues that arose in the judiciary, and the Chief Justice appointed a working group, and I staffed that working group and worked on some changes to the judiciary's internal procedures in terms of judges holding each other accountable. And that was very meaningful to me as someone who has been sexually harassed in the workplace, and also just an incredibly valuable learning experience to see how you move institutional reform within an institution. So it's part of what motivated me. I put together a DC Council accountability plan, which talks about proposals to help the DC Council make laws and conduct oversight better, be more ethical, be more inclusive and accessible so it's easier for people to participate, and to support its own workers better. And those are ideas that are rooted in my professional background, and I think my focus on institutional accountability is unique to this position. The other thing I would note in response to this question is that there is a power dynamic and structure that really discourages sitting council members from running against the current chair, and that's why we don't see that. So in this race, there's one competitor to the incumbent, and it's me. And I think that the current council chair deserves a qualified competitor, and I'm happy to take that on.
That sounds really nice. I like the confidence and boldness of your words.
Yeah, it's not built in. This is something I've had to shore myself up for as well.
Well, good for you. So what have you considered then to be the most challenging part of your campaign so far? Is it perhaps a lack of name recognition? I mean, you are running against somebody who has been the incumbent since 2012. That's 2 years longer than our current mayor. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think your first question touches on one of the biggest challenges, is the built-in assumption that somebody from the outside may not have the experience or qualifications to do the job. So I've had a lot of conversations around your first question about why I'm running for the seat and what I bring to the table. I don't actually think name recognition is the biggest hurdle, because we've seen from some polling and in my personal experience that people don't seem to overall have a very strong view on the current council chair.
Mhm.
And there's also some desire for change. The sitting council chair has been around for quite some time. I'd say one of the other hurdles is doing all this with 3 children. So it's the forever challenge of work-life balance. And that I don't think will ever really go away in my life. It's something I've dealt with before and continue to deal with, but finding the space to also be a mom on top of everything else is something. And
Absolutely.
I contend with that. And I try and bring them into the process. That's something that I'm pretty dedicated to. They come to a lot of events, they're very involved, which they may resent on some level, but they get something out of it.
I think it's very charming how you have incorporated your entire family and your 3 sons in campaigning and in being an active part of your campaigning. Actually, that is not a question that I have in my list right now, but uh, there are some candidates who are very comfortable bringing their family life into their campaigning. And there are some candidates and incumbents who are very mum about their family life and about their children. And perhaps, the children only kind of come out as, I don't want to be insulting, but really more than glorified photo ops. If you have just like a quick insight on what that feels like for you or what that looks like for you.
Well, I think COVID and virtual life in some ways changed that because we lost the firm barrier between our work and our personal lives. And that was very challenging. And I like to have some compartmentalization. But I think the humanization of other people, that you could see people's lives, their children, their pets, that's not all bad. And I worked at a big law firm and there was a lot of that, this idea that you do not bring your family into your work. You don't talk about them. If you have to leave early, you don't explain why. And I think being honest about being parents or being caretakers of our parents, whatever your obligations are, is just human, and we should have compassion and room for that. And also, my kids have a lot to learn from all of this. So I took my oldest to a meet and greet yesterday, and he sat in the back and he mostly watched something on my phone, but I asked him afterward, did you hear something interesting? And this was a meet and greet in Ward 8. And he said, well, they were talking about how they don't have access to food. They don't have a good grocery store, and that it's hard to get stuff there. And I was like, yes, this is a big thing. This is a big issue. And it's something that he absorbed on some level. And I think that's really, really great for them to see and understand and think about.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful insight. It's always amazing what kids, the feedback from kids, from I guess like a less jaded mind, if you will. So going back to my original line of questioning, what do you feel are some things that the incumbent has done well? I mean, he has been a chairman since 2012, and he has been in the council longer than that. What are some of the things that he's done well, and some of his biggest blind spots? I guess you're uniquely qualified here to kind of either praise or dunk on him, but let's hear it.
Well, this is an interesting question because I don't think I've been asked before what I think he has done well. And I think some of it is demeanor, and that he seems to work hard and kind of keep his head down and do the work. That has always been my impression of him, that he doesn't seem to involve her. And I appreciate that. I appreciate someone who does the work as public service and just kind of sits down and does the work. And there are historical policy things that he talks about that are very good, including his support for gay marriage and some of the earlier gun control legislation, the Heller decision. And that's positive, but I think there has been something of a shift, and there are downsides that come with long time incumbency, including I think it's harder to see the institutional flaws and the need for accountability. So a prime example of that is the former Ward 2 council member, Jack Evans, who was known to be engaging in misconduct, and that was kind of an open secret. and we saw really kind of a bury your head in the sand approach to it. The DC Council always had the authority and the power to do its own investigation, to take action as the council, and did not do that until there was outcry from the public and advisory neighborhood commissioners and other groups. And I think it's easier to get into that pattern of kind of turning your head the other way and the isolated council offices, and something I'd really like to see, because I perceive the council as operating a lot as islands, the individual council member offices. And that, to me, with a background in institutional accountability, is a red flag, because it's the peer-to-peer accountability that helps keep people in check. But also opening the doors and having more communication and collaboration, it would be good for the council. I think there's not a great amount of institutionalized across the council support. And that by building the infrastructure around the council as a whole, they can operate better as a collective body. And that's better for everyone. That's better for democracy. When you have individual isolated offices kind of doing their own thing, that's not as effective and not as representative of the broader community. So that's something more I'd like to see. I think we've seen some big oversight failures and challenges. So like the sports betting contract, I think, is an example of where governance comes into play, and it played out in a very problematic way. That was a no bid contract, which a no bid contract at its heart is a red flag. You want competing bids for a contract because that's what provides a level of standard and competition. So it was a no bid contract, and that was kind of a known red flag. And then you saw some kind of peculiar behind the scenes trading and communications in terms of approving that contract. And then it didn't deliver. It actually cost the district money, and it just was not, it didn't play out well. It wasn't good government. It was an example of a legislative and oversight failure. Again, I think is reflective of kind of longtime incumbency and wanting to just push something for some desired end without going through the required procedures.
Sure. Well, on the heels of that, I was going to save this question for a little bit later, but it seems kind of opportune to go ahead and segue into it. But the Office of United Communications has made several life-threatening errors, and yet Mayor Bowser appointed Karima Holmes as acting director of the agency, despite many of the more grievous errors that happened exactly during her tenure. Should the Council of DC have been more vocal in their opposition to this appointment? What would you have done differently as chairwoman?
Yeah, the Office of Unified Communications is a known problem, and that question speaks to me personally, because we saw close by to me on Kennedy Street 2 deaths that resulted from their failure to timely get people to a residence, including a child. And that was very heartbreaking. And around that time, our Advisory Neighborhood Commission called for an audit of the Office of Unified Communications, which had some known problems, but we pushed along with some other commissions for an audit, which the DC auditor performed and had recommendations. And that's all great, but advisory neighborhood commissioners are not really equipped for doing oversight. That was functionally oversight. And I think it's reflective of a council level failure to do that work, which should have been happening. The problems at the Office of Unified Communications were known. They were longstanding, and there should have been calls for that audit independent of the commissions. I'm glad that we got that moving. And there should be more engagement around the director and that role and the failed leadership there. And I don't know, like we sometimes see agency directors. There was the recent appointment of the interim DDOT director as the director, and there was a lot of opposition to that, and then there wasn't a council vote on it. And my view is that more process is almost always better, and creating the public record, whether they voted to approve or not approve, that should be, in my view, on the record, and there should be discussion around that and why council members are or are not taking a particular stance, because when you remove that, that accountability function goes away and we don't know the why. And it also, I think, discourages public participation when you have outcry over something and then it just moves forward without any explanation.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, speaking about accountability and public outcry, there were so many budget hearings specifically about DC public schools. And there's been kind of the feeling that because it's under mayoral control, there are hearings, but there are not enough voices that are being heard. Teachers don't feel heard. The union doesn't feel heard. Parents don't feel heard either. And there is also the feeling that the council, and especially the chairman, is not doing enough to stand up to the mayor when it's come to several decisions of DCPS and DCPSB. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I very much appreciate that question. So we have a very unique governance system of our schools, which is mayoral control, and it's especially concentrated decision-making within the mayor because of our status as a non-state. So even in other places that have a large mayoral function concentration in education, there's usually some other balance in the different layers of government, and we don't even have that.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is when you have so much decision-making within the mayor, you have to have a really strong legislative branch as a co-equal branch of government that will conduct the oversight necessary to balance that concentration of decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we have that. What we see is the sitting council chair dissolved the standalone education committee at the council.
Mm-hmm.
And we are now the only quasi-state that doesn't have such a standalone education committee.
Oh.
And he has claimed that that has somehow brought more oversight because the council as a whole considers education issues, but that's not functionally what we see. And many people have experienced the hearings that do take place where it's an oversight hearing of 8 different education agencies and the witness list is 300 people long. And you're supposed to talk about anything and everything in 3 minutes. And then you have challenging and inaccessible hearing proceedings where people are expected to take an entire day off of work and testify at some time that they don't know. And it's all very muddled and confusing. And I think bringing back the standalone education committee is important because it's dedicated and focused oversight on schools. And also some of the things that I call for in my DC Council accountability plan to provide more institutionalized, nonpartisan support for the council would be helpful there too. I think that in addition to committee staff, it would be helpful to have a nonpartisan research service, which could consider best practices across jurisdictions. There are a lot of different governance structures that can make sense or have value, and that would allow us to consider what other places are doing and what might work in DC. What's interesting is there used to be a nonpartisan research service for the council. It existed at some time and then went away. And I think it needs to come back. And for people who contextually, I think it's helpful to think about the federal level that we have the Congressional Research Service, and that's a good, valuable thing that brings institutionalized knowledge that crosses offices and crosses elected officials. So it builds in the institutional knowledge within the institution. And because what we don't want is for one person or one office to have knowledge that then leaves when they leave. That's not in support of the institution as a whole.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that thorough answer. Moving on to specifically, well, the Hillis home is mostly Ward 6, although now we are also Ward 7 and 8. Redistricting left Ward 6 residents reeling from the redrawing of boundaries and the feeling that not all council members are patently available or open to listen to constituents, or many of them feel that way. Some constituents are routinely complaining that they cannot reach their council member's office. And as we have talked in the past, actually, with at-large candidates, people are not necessarily aware that they can also reach out to at-large offices. So how would you help lead the Council of the District of Columbia so constituents realize that they can reach out to you, then that they can feel more included and listened to in their concerns and complaints?
Yes, that's a great question. And that is the core function of government, is hearing from and listening to residents. That's who elected officials represent. And I think there's kind of two parts to your question, the redistricting part, which redistricting is a tough conversation because I think it's bound to make somebody angry in some way.
Absolutely.
And part of what was challenging here is that there was an attempt to neutralize the process by placing it within a committee with an at-large council member at the helm. But then there were things that happened behind the scenes, and we don't really know what the ward council members did. And I think in the future, when we go through the redistricting process, that should be independent of the council. Just like how advisory neighborhood commissioners in some wards were not allowed to sit on the ward task forces, I don't really think the council members should be involved, just for a layer of neutrality. On the accessibility point, this goes back to some of what I talk about in my DC Council accountability plan, and that individual council member offices handle things very differently. So you will see some ward level council member offices where people generally feel like there's good responsiveness, and others where people may feel more challenged. And I think there should be more cross office and council wide efforts at coordinating how council members are accessible to community members and communicate with them, and more standardized procedures mostly for hearings, just to make sure that people have an easy to understand way to participate.
What would that look like? Sorry, that's more standardized procedures. Like how can you make hearings less terrible?
Well, so part of the challenge, and I say this as someone who testifies, is that it's done differently depending on what committee you're dealing with. So sometimes you have to sign up 3 days in advance. Sometimes it's 5 days. Sometimes the record closes a month later. Sometimes it's that day. Sometimes they accept testimony one way or not another way. And I think there should be conversation around standardizing that. So it's at a minimum consistent. And then there are mechanisms to make it easier. We've seen some of that with technology and hybrid hearings that people, I mean, I've testified while walking. I think Councilmember Robert White said somebody testified from an airport. I think we should be more open to things like that. The Historic Preservation Review Board has timed panels, which I think is an easy thing to do that gives a little more structure, and means that people don't have to take an entire day off of their job to participate. And this is one of those things that there's constant room for improvement. So there should be continual discussions about how to make participation easier. And that's not a discussion or process that ever ends, particularly because we have new technology and new opportunities that come up that can make these things easier. And I'll end that by talking about a State Board of Education representative who I love, who has done pop-up testimony in the past, where she goes and just talks to people on the street and records them. And it just shows me that there's so much room between like truly meeting people where they are and just being very inaccessible and hard to figure out. So we have a lot of ways we can improve and become more accessible to residents. And again, that should be a continual conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of want to close with that. These are two questions, but I will try to finagle them into one. What you said actually about what your son focused on, in fact, of the dearth of resources in Ward 7 and 8, but especially, like the communities east of the river. There's one thing that stands out the most, and it is transportation. There's efforts to bring streetcar to Ward 7 that have gone by the wayside. There's circulator routes that disappear going into Ward 7 and 8. There's bus lines that disappear. How can we make transportation more equitable? How can you, as a chairwoman, focus transportation? So that's one part of the question. And then, how can we make Vision Zero less of a punchline?
Now, those are great questions. I think transportation and Vision Zero is in many ways the issue of the day. Mm-hmm. And I have a safe streets infrastructure and public transportation plan. I'll lead with that just because that has a lot of detail if anyone wants to look at that. Mm-hmm. In terms of the equity.
And just before you get started, I will be including this on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter when I share our conversation. There will be links to your resources.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of work goes into these plans, and I appreciate sharing them so that people can actually look at them. I will start with Charles Allen's Metro for All proposal, which is not just great for equity in public transportation because it's a transit subsidy, like putting money in people's hands to use public transportation, but also because it involves a funding component that puts money back into bus infrastructure where it's most needed. So it has an additional equity component in terms of the infrastructure side, which is something that we really have to be thinking about, because public transportation is only equitable if it's actually working, if you can rely on it. If you're not sitting there at a bus stop with no bus shelter, waiting for 20 minutes for a bus that doesn't ultimately show up. So a lot of it.
If you're waiting for a bus, or if you're thinking about walking to a bus and the nearest stop is like 20 minutes away, right?
Yes. Yes. So a big part of it is expanded service that is reliable. And that involves funding. And I think the bus is a key feature here, because we have a little bit more control over the bus as opposed to Metro. We really can invest in bus infrastructure. We can have dedicated bus lanes and more service that ensures that people have the reliability of buses that come regularly and get them where they need to go when they need to get there. I've had some interesting discussions about the streetcar, which I'm supportive of, and I think needs to be done and done well. And part of the problem with the streetcar is that we do these kind of half-assed investments and things, and then they don't work. And people say, well, let's just scrap this because it didn't work out well. And so we should be putting in these transportation features so that they actually function well and serve people. Otherwise, they're not worth doing. And part of what I find challenging about the streetcar is we're so focused on that specific mode of transportation. And part of that is that Ward 7 is such a transit desert otherwise. Like we're talking about it with such emphasis because they don't have other things. So we need to just be talking about public transportation more broadly and providing all the services that people need to get around, including sidewalks. Sidewalks are something I talk about a lot. There are big portions of Ward 7 that you can't really walk around because there are big sidewalk gaps. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think it's both funding and oversight of DDOT and a dedication to equity in transportation. And we've clearly seen that that's lacking. That's why we have the structures we have and the systems we have, and we need to correct for that. On Vision Zero is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I work on as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. And it is in many ways the top issue because people want cars to slow down. They want to feel safe walking and rolling around their neighborhoods. And part of the frustration is that we have so many known traffic safety infrastructure mechanisms that can be implemented. Like the suite of traffic calming is known. We know what it's raised crosswalks and curb extensions and it's a set of features that can be implemented. So it's pretty clearly in my mind a question of political will that we don't see these things implemented. It's not so much that we need studies. It's not that we don't
The
understand.
studies have been done.
Yes, the studies have been done and we know what works to slow down cars. It's that there's opposition to slowing down cars that somehow is pulling the strings. But the calculus has to shift because we're talking about children who are getting hit by cars. We're talking about seniors and everyone else. And we just need to have a safer structure.
How does oversight kind of help that or inform being able to say, listen, what needs to happen is cars need to slow down? What would that look like under your chairwomanship?
Yeah, it's DDOT. DDOT is one of the more frustrating entities. So we, hopefully this isn't too in the weeds. So we had a process called the traffic safety assessment process, which was a mechanism whereby you could say, there's a problem of speeding on my street. DDOT, come look at it and propose some solutions. And ANCs were brought in, if there was a request made, you would support it, and then DDOT would act on it. And they weren't acting on traffic safety assessments by and large. And there was political pressure, and then they changed the process in name to traffic safety investigations. And now it's just submit a 311 request and it goes into the void. Advisory neighborhood commissioners are not involved. And in my experience, those are just closed out. So some of it is following the thread from start to finish to say this original procedure might have been better if it had been implemented well. We've moved to something that isn't working. We need to circle back and do it the right way. And I think some of it is, again, resource related. And I see this as a commissioner. It's hard to follow this stuff start to finish. You get tired. Agencies give you the runaround and it gets hard. But with institutionalized support for the council to better follow an issue from start to finish, with greater use of entities like the DC Auditor's Office, which has done an audit of Vision Zero, and the ability to act on the recommendations of the auditor, that's all very helpful. Something else that's in my accountability plan is greater use of the Council Office of Racial Equity, going back to the equity question. So using that office more and engaging more with its recommendations in response to proposed legislation, to make sure that we are meaningfully taking that equity component and building it back into the legislation and oversight. Because if they're just coming out with equity reports and that's the end of it, that doesn't do anything. It has to funnel back into our laws and procedures.
Understand. Well, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate your thoughtful and thorough answers. If there's anything else that perhaps you would have wanted to share that we didn't get a chance to talk about, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This has been wonderful, and I appreciate the time. I know that everyone is busy, and I recognize what you said at the beginning, that doing a video and meeting people where they are is really valuable. And I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I think I would just go back to my professional background in ethics and accountability and what that means to me in terms of working every day toward a more ethical and accountable government. Something that I learned in my job with the judiciary is that there's no fixed point. You don't reach an ethical institution. It's not just, we're there, we're done. It's something that you work on every day. It's a daily practice. And the good government and accountability side is baked into how I think about things, and something that I bring to the table and I think is really valuable. And renewed attention to that, I think, would be good for the DC Council. How the council operates is really what impacts everything that comes out of the council. It impacts the laws, it impacts the oversight. So if the council is operating at its highest levels, if it is well supported, if it's ethical, if people are contributing their views and feedback, it's the strongest entity that it can be. And that's really what I want. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And
best of luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.